Yeah, so this continues to be debated. So you're asking what are the health impacts of obesity?
Right.
Yeah, so this continues to be debated just how harmful it is. I mean, I think pretty much everyone agrees that it's not good for you, but the degree of harm is continuing to be debated. However, I believe that it is quite harmful. There are a couple of different lines of evidence that we can look at. So the one I think that's most visible when we start thinking about this question are observational studies that have just measured people's body mass index, which is just their weight corrected for height. And then they say, hey, so, we measured 10,000 people's body mass index. Let's see who gets sick and who doesn't, and we'll correlate that with baseline body mass index. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, and you just kind of do it in a really simple way, you see that there's not a really strong correlation between body mass index and health outcomes. However, and they call this the obesity paradox, the fact that we have all of this research from basic science in animal models and randomized controlled trials with short-term outcomes suggesting that it's really not good for you to have excess fat, but then in these big long-term observational studies we're not really seeing that as much. And the reason, I think a major reason for that is that these studies may suffer from pretty serious confounding. Mm-hmm. So particularly something called reverse causality, where basically instead of it's not just obesity making people sick, it's sick people losing weight, and so making being lean look less healthy than it should, because if you have cancer, if you have Alzheimer's disease, if you have diabetes, if you have certain types of cardiovascular disease, many of those actually cause weight loss. And so what you might be seeing is that people who are sick, the relationship is confounded because people who are sick weigh less than they otherwise would if they weren't sick. So it makes being lean look more dangerous than it should. And so when you correct for that, there are a couple different ways to do it that I'll just gloss over for now unless you want to talk about them. When you correct for that, basically obesity starts to look a lot more harmful. So essentially, the more fat you carry on your body, the higher your risk of having a heart attack, the higher your risk of having cancer, the higher the risk of having stroke, higher risk of having arthritis is a common one. Right. And the strongest relationship of all is with type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes is exquisitely sensitive to body fatness and calorie intake, in calorie in and out, basically what we call energy balance, the relationship between calories coming in and calories going out and your body fatness. That type 2 diabetes is exquisitely sensitive to that. And so if you reduce someone's calorie intake or increase their physical activity level and you cause them to lose weight a little bit, it doesn't even have to be that much. There are a number of really very high quality, long-term, randomized controlled trials with actual real diabetes outcomes that show that all those things I just mentioned substantially reduce the risk of progressing to type 2 diabetes. So just to put that another way, we have really, really solid evidence that you can actually prevent type 2 diabetes by reducing calorie intake or increasing expenditure via diet or physical activity.
Right.
And furthermore, you can actually reverse established type 2 diabetes. This was shown in a trial called the DIRECT trial. It took people with mild type 2 diabetes and showed basically if you put them on a very low calorie diet, 46% of people by the end of a year, so a temporary low calorie diet for a few months, then maintenance out to a year, 46% of them didn't have diabetes anymore. They were off their medications, their blood glucose was controlled, they were able to eat carbohydrate like normally without insulin or anything. And so this shows that, developing diabetes and the maintenance of the diabetic state are exquisitely sensitive to calorie intake. And so, so I just wanted to mention that diabetes is the disease that is most tightly linked to body fatness and energy balance, and that's been shown over and over and over again. And one of the main mechanisms that connects body fatness to these chronic diseases is insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is the primary metabolic factor that underlies type 2 diabetes, and it is also exquisitely sensitive to energy balance and body fatness. And just to make sure everyone is on board with what I'm talking about, insulin resistance insulin is this really important hormone that regulates your blood glucose and your blood fat levels, and kind of is I like to call it a metabolic traffic cop in the body that kind of directs the traffic of different metabolic fuels. And if that's screwed up, if your tissues can't hear insulin very well, if it requires more insulin to get the same metabolic job done, then we call that insulin resistance. And that's kind of what happens to the typical person who's eating the typical diet and not being physically active. Once that person ages somewhat, they are likely going to be insulin resistant. And one of the main causes of that is positive energy balance and excess body fatness. So insulin resistance is exquisitely sensitive to those, and then insulin resistance goes on to cause these other things like diabetes, and probably contributes to cancer risk, and almost certainly contributes to cardiovascular disease risk. And so I think that's a major pathway by which body fatness and calorie intake impacts disease risk. Right. And there's tons of evidence. I just gave a talk on this, so I've got all the evidence in my brain right now, and I won't avalanche people with it, but I just want to say that there's tons of evidence supporting what I just said, and it's not speculation at all at this point.
Yeah, and I've seen much of that evidence, and the increasing cancer risks, increasing evidence about cancer risks. Yet like you said, there are still some folks out there that will try to debate this, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I always said if I ever got a chance to talk to you, I'd ask you your opinion on various movements that aim to normalize obesity in the name of various alternative social causes that focus on the political correctness.
Yeah, it's a challenging situation because, first of all, I absolutely recognize the value of people feeling good about their bodies, and nothing that I say is intended to guilt trip anyone about their body. And, I think it's great to want to feel good about your body no matter what your body looks like. Mm-hmm. I think that sometimes this movement kind of gets into denialism, I would say, about the health impacts of weight. So, in the service of feeling good about themselves, they will kind of deny that there's a connection between body weight and health, or body fatness and health, I should say. And my perspective is, like, I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad about themselves. That's not my goal, and I would rather not do that, regardless of a person's weight.
Right.
But and I also, try to treat everyone with respect regardless of their weight. But there are facts that I think we should acknowledge. I think people should have this information to be able to use it and make their own decisions. Like, I don't want people to feel bad, but I do want them to have the information, the best information possible.